Hi there, thanks so much for joining me today for the latest episode of Impact Real Estate Investing. My guest today is Karina Ricks, the inaugural director of the City of Pittsburgh's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. This new department has very clear goals to serve its citizens. Karina wants to ensure that no one dies or is seriously injured traveling on city streets, that every household in Pittsburgh can access fresh fruits and vegetables within 20 minutes travel of home without the requirement of a private vehicle, that all trips less than 1 mile are easily and enjoyably achieved by non-vehicle travel, that streets and intersections can be intuitively navigated by an adolescent, and that the combined cost of transportation, housing, and energy does not exceed 45% of household income for any income group. These goals sound simple, but are really quite a revolutionary way for a city department to be thinking about transportation infrastructure. Be sure to go to evepicker.com to find out more about Karina on the show notes page for this episode. And be sure to sign up for my newsletter so you can access information about impact real estate investing and get the latest news about the exciting projects on my crowdfunding platform, Small Change. Hi, Karina. Thanks very much for joining me.
Great to be here. Thanks.
So you're the first director of a brand new department in Pittsburgh, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. And I'm wondering how that department came to be.
So the department came the way that many of them have emerged in recent years in the U.S., which is that the city had a Department of Public Works, which really was primarily responsible for maintenance of the transportation assets that we have in the city. So clearing snow from streets, patching potholes, generally replacing in kind. We also had a Department of City Planning, which was tasked with sort of longer term, longer range objectives of communities. But there was this missing middle that was sort of thinking about this tremendous infrastructure that we have. We're responsible for about 1/5 of the land area of the city, which are the public rights of way. And rather than just replace in kind, really starting to think about how is this asset contributing to the sustainability of the city, the ability to thrive of our local neighborhoods. What are the policies for management and operations that need to be put in place to really get to those objectives? And so the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure was created to fill that gap, and it drew staff from both the Department of Public Works and the Department of City Planning to bring together, in a way, this transportation, land use, economic development objectives, and think very proactively about the design of our infrastructure, the use of our infrastructure. And if I can go just for a minute to talk about, had nothing to do with the name of the department. I'm the first director, but the creation of the department was something that was a product of the mayor. But I'm thrilled at the name. So in the U.S., initially these kinds of departments were called the Departments of Highways, which really sort of informs their priorities, right? Where we were thinking about things in the time that was back in the 50s and 60s. They were Departments of Highways. Then they sort of morphed and changed their names to be Departments of Transportation. Well, that's fine and well. But what we've learned, recent research that was done by Harvard University found that the time that it takes to commute, so the time of travel and the reliability of travel, is the single most important factor in families and households being able to change their economic status. So beyond the quality of their neighborhoods, or public safety issues, or other kinds of elements, their access to transportation, their ability to move from where they lived to where they were going to get the different kinds of goods and services and jobs that they had, was the single most important factor in escaping poverty, in changing their economic status. And so in essence, it said that physical mobility was the most important factor in economic mobility. And so I think that really sums up what this department is about. It's about mobility, not just moving around, but it's about mobility of changing lives. And that's really some of the emphasis that I'm trying to bring to my staff and to the work that we do.
So, this is really fascinating because, as I do these interviews, all the threads sort of come together for me. I'm learning a lot. And I just interviewed an architect in Australia who's really built an entire sort of new affordable housing model around exactly that thesis, that cities don't run without essential people who serve it, and those people are generally being pushed out. Well, this was in Melbourne, Australia, which is a very, very wealthy and sprawly city, but those people are generally being pushed out further and further and further. And so we have to find a way to have them be able to afford to live closer in and be mobile in different ways without having a car. So there in Australia, he's developed an entire new housing model kind of based on that thesis.
Right. Well, we also refer often to the H plus T index. We talk about the housing plus transportation index, and we have a measurable goal for my department and for the city, which is that no household in the city of Pittsburgh should need to spend more than 45% of their income on housing and transportation, which are the two largest household expenses at any income quintile. So you really need to, look at it across income rates. And we know, just like any other city, that housing prices are increasing.
Yes.
But what's interesting is in Pittsburgh today, households spend about 21% of their income on housing, which is fairly low compared to other places.
Yeah.
But they spend 20% of their income on transportation, which is quite high. So if housing prices increase, we can keep people in our city if we're able to work on the other side of that equation, which is driving transportation costs down, so that we can stay at that affordable net affordable threshold.
So your department is really a whole lot more than about transportation. You're really an economic development department too.
We like to think of ourselves that way. Absolutely.
Yeah. How interesting. Yeah. And so you talked about well, let me just ask you about you. How did you come to be in this position? What's your background?
I took the scenic route, I would say, to
my whole life to see.
So my original career objectives were in environmental sustainability. And so really focusing on those issues around climate change and overall sustainability and efficiency there. Through some different twists and turns, I ended up doing a fair amount of work in economic development, actually in Tonga. I was in the Peace Corps, and did economic development there, and then that continued to work in other communities of the global South, and then from there, it actually morphed into some democracy work in the several countries in Eastern Europe. And I came back to the US and got my master's degree after having all of this experience. And it sort of, these different threads came together in city building, the ways that cities are situated, the ways that relates to economic prosperity, democracy, inclusion, equality. And those threads immediately led to transportation, because if you really can't access these markets, if you can't access these forums where these decisions are being made, you are by definition being left out. And this is what leads to a lot of the social isolation that we have, a lot of the cultural segregation that we have, certainly in this country and other countries as well, where people are really just not engaging with one another. They're not being exposed to persons of different persuasions and different opinions, and it's leading to a lot of strife. So, oddly, it really is mobility, transportation access that has this tremendous impact on the climate, that has this enormous impact on economic prosperity, that has a huge influence over social cohesion and sort of political peacemaking. And so that sort of led me to this place that I'm at now.
Interesting. So, I connected with you through an article that I read in City Lab about the mobility conference that was held here in Pittsburgh last year, which sounded really fascinating to me. Tell me a little bit about that and the purpose of it.
Oh, it was a tremendous experience. It was really one of the most inspiring things that I've had the privilege to be a part of. So it was prompted from, there was a very exclusive conference that was held here in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago that was really contemplating what the rise of autonomy and autonomous vehicles and new urban mobility, what the consequences of that might be for city form and urban design and architecture and disciplines like that. And it was an invite only convening. It had all of the greatest brains from around the world as part of it. I was privileged to be included in that group, which was wonderful. And all of these good people throughout this 2-day meeting were consistently coming back to the themes of equity and inclusion. And then one individual that was there kind of approached me in the course of the meeting, and they said, isn't this odd? Here are all of these people, all of whom are making, very comfortable livings, have high educational attainments, and they're all talking about equity and inclusion and all of these good things. But where are the real experts in that area? Meaning, where are the people who live it day in and day out, who are really constrained by the situation of their lives and the things that they face and the problems that they need to solve each and every day? Those are the experts. Why are they not in this room? All of us, the privileged few, are talking as if we know. And so from that kind of discussion, he and I kept up the conversation going for the next year or so. And from that came this mobility conference, which was a conference, a workshop, co-creation kind of event, where we, again, by invite only, but we brought these tremendous subject matter luminaries, experts, top of their class, innovators in mobility and technology and operations. And a third of the conference were those folks leading in the city and the nation. But a third of the people, we paid a living wage and we provided mobility supplement to them, were people who are on the margins, on the edges. They're the people that were formerly incarcerated, people that are single mothers with minimum wage jobs, trying to kind of just get their kids to all the places they need to go to and scrape by their own lives. They were people who face a host of other social and economic challenges that we paid them to be the experts in the room. And so a third of the people of the conference were that representation. And then the last third were governments and nonprofits and enablers that could be a part of it. And we really workshopped, what are the challenges that you face, the mobility challenges that you face? What are the things that we can do that would make a real difference? Which some of them were as small as providing better lighting at bus stops at night, or being able to hail, make sure that the bus driver can see that you're waiting there in the bus shelter, so that the one bus that comes every 40 minutes doesn't pass you by because they didn't see you, to creating whole new services that would address these third shift working needs, the hotel and restaurant hospitality workers that oftentimes face certain challenges in the level of service that is provided at the time that they leave work, but also concern for personal safety as they're carrying tips or cash or something like that, to school age children mobility so that their parents can do that. So we really workshopped through what is the problem? What is the set of solutions? How can we create new services, new applications, just new improvements that are actionable, that there is actually a timeline and a funding means. And we came out of there with, 6 or 8 things that we're continuing to really work through, but solutions and stories that we never would have heard in that very intimate, tangible way if those experts hadn't been there saying, this is what I do to get by. This is what I'm forced to do to make these things happen. Yes, that would make a difference in my, in the way that I was traveling. So it was a tremendous event. It was really inspiring.
It sounds inspiring. And what were the outcomes? Like, I know the one thing that City Lab talked about was the Micromobility Collective, but I'm sure there were more.
Yeah. So Micromobility was one of the bigger lifts that came out of there.
Let's start that first, and then we can, because I think the listeners would be interested in hearing what that is.
So the micromobility, microtransit solution was one where it was particularly aimed at the workers who work at our hotels and nighttime restaurants, nighttime economy, kinds of workers who our transit services do very, very well for the daytime office-based workers, but transit service diminishes greatly in those evening hours. We have many employers in the city who operate shuttles for their daytime office employees to get them from various remote parking spaces to their campuses. And those shuttles then are just parked and silent in the nighttime. And so this was an opportunity using technology to actually map where workers were, to allow a hailing application so that they could indicate when they were in need of a ride, optimize route planning to be very highly efficient so that we could give kind of on-demand mobility, or at least scheduled service to pick up these nighttime economy workers and bring them to their places of employment and back again, and using vehicles that already exist in the city but are basically idled during the time that they are needed there, so we could get that greater efficiency from them. And then talking with their employers, who immediately saw the value of doing this, because someone needs to obviously subsidize a service like this, and they immediately saw the value because of the high turnover rates that they experienced when their employees, if you need to have your cook, your chef, there at a particular time because you've got a dining room full of patrons that you need to attend to, if you need to have your room cleaning people there so that you can turn over the keys in your hotel, if you need to have trusted staff that you have trained and that you feel good about so that your customers and your clients have a great experience too, but that person is habitually 30 minutes late, may not show up at all because of the mobility challenges they have, well, you can't keep that person around as an employer. You're going to have to dismiss them for a failure in performance, but that has a cost to you to find that next person, to train that next person, to feel trusted with them. And so all they needed was to get their employees there on time, and all their employees really wanted was also to get there on time. Yeah. So this was a natural matching that we could do. So that was the micromobility, and we called it the Safe Shift service, and partnered with a company called Move It to help develop that application that would identify where those workers were, how to optimize the routes. We're still working with the employers to really bring that into operation, but the research is completed, and so we're continuing to advance on that one. Some of the other things that came out, as I said, were just simple improvements, like could there be a switch of sorts on the shelter that could illuminate something to make sure that the driver of a bus knew that there was a
Okay.
transit rider there in the shelter, and they wouldn't just blast by because there's not so many people in those late night hours. But if that bus passes them by, it is a huge impact on the potential rider. I'm trying to remember some of the other things, but there was some really, really great, not necessarily deeply costly solutions that could be implemented that would have real benefits so that we could do something more than just talk about how much we wanted to address equity and inclusion. But there were some things that we could really do that we knew would be welcomed and useful because they were co-designed by the people who require them themselves.
Fabulous. And then there was also a description of these hubs that you have been
Mm-hmm.
and the partners. I was kind of really interested in the partners in them and why they care and how you brought them to the table.
Right. So that's a bit of a different initiative that came. It was, maybe had some of its birth in the mobility conference, but through other inputs, we understood that there's a whole host of micromobility, new mobility that's coming to cities across the globe. And many cities, as is too typical for us, are caught flat-footed with these new technologies. We really don't know how to use them, how to manage them. We end up with our cities, somewhat littered with e-scooters, or, previously it was dockless bikes, and, they're there and we're all excited about it. But we're not quite sure exactly who they're serving. The management of the public space could obviously be better in many cases. And they're not really integrated together into a singular system. The onus is really on the user to figure out what is the range of services available in the city. They need to set up a separate profile for each and every service that's there. They need to kind of do their own comparison and cobble together their own services, where they might take a ride share from this point to this point, but then a scooter share from here to here, and then the transit from there to there. But they need to open up 3 different apps and do their own planning to do that. And it's really a very difficult and challenging arrangement for the user. We said we can do better than that. We can work with the private sector, maybe just one provider, in order to see what works, do some experimentation with them to develop our own policies, to figure out how we can really get toward this elusive mobility as a service concept, where the users can have the whole buffet of mobility options available to them, presented to them in a single way, so that they can choose based on what is motivating them, whether it's time or price or environmental performance or fun factor or whatever it is that they want to do. So we put out a solicitation for a mobility collective, and we said, we want you to self-organize, dear industry. Please self-organize and bring together different kinds of services. We don't just want the walled garden, as it's called, where it's Uber that says, well, we've got scooters and bikes and car share, and you only need work with us. Thank you very much. That's wonderful. But we might see some downsides to having that much control in one place. So we said you need to have multiple companies, multiple services, and you need to be prepared to experiment with us to figure out how we best manage our public space, how we best really get to this notion of inclusion and inclusivity, and run some pilots and run some demonstrations to do that. And so we got great response. We were excited at the number of responses that we got. We selected a partnership that's led by Spin, which is a subsidiary of Ford Motor Company, and they brought with them Zipcar and Swift Mile and Waze Carpool and Transit app, and a number of different independent. They are not all owned or even have an ownership stake with one another. So they're an independent collection of companies, each bringing a different kind of service together. And they proposed to us that they would like to come to the city and establish mobility hubs, where we would have this range of different services all sort of co-located together in some of our different centers and critical destination areas, that we would formulate a platform that would allow the user to tap into all of these different services, so the user would really be in control, that we would really use as the backbone of this system our public transit system, so that it is additive rather than competitive to transit, that it would preserve our public bike share, which was very important to us as well. That we love micromobility and all of the private companies that are popping up, but they're also dispersing as quickly as they're popping up. We don't want that to happen, that we totally do away with our public bike share. That is as much a critical public transit option as buses and trains are. So that was one of the requirements as well. And it's been great so far. We really applaud Spin for their willingness to kind of go into the unknown with us, to be really true partners, to be open and vulnerable, and they're able to do that because we've said we're going to not allow any other entrants into our city while you're going through this sort of experimentation phase with us. So we're going to give you a safe space to be vulnerable as long as you're willing to do that with us and to really figure this out in a very, very much of a partnership way. And I really applaud them. I couldn't have asked for a better partner so far. They and all of the other companies that they've brought along with them are really very authentically and truly working with us, and we're figuring it out. And I'm excited to see where this is going to go.
Yeah, it's making me smile. It's a pretty fabulous initiative. So then there really are no results so far. It's really
not well. I would say that there have been some results so far. So we've talked a lot more about these mobility hubs, and so those are progressing to really ensure that we have, in particular, electric charging that can be multi-purpose, so that these charging stations, so the recharging micromobility vehicles is a major limiting factor to them. And what am I trying to say?
So that's kind of a core thing for these stations to be able to pull something up and charge it.
Right. So that you can pull a bike up, you can pull an e-scooter up, you can pull whatever the next generation of these things are up, that the car share can be electrified, that ride hailing curbsides can be managed for efficient drop off and pickup at the curbside. So a whole host of different things. And again, to the convenience of the user.
None of these hubs are actually live yet?
We're doing the location selection right now, and then there's some there's a fair bit of infrastructure that needs to go into, again, because it involves electrifying them.
Yeah. And how many locations are you shooting for?
Initially, there's 50, which is, given the size of our city, that's pretty good.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
And then
I'm going to root for a location near me, Karina.
So.
It sounds really, really fabulous, and it really does. And it's really nice to hear that those companies care and want to think this through. It's pretty fabulous. Okay, so let me finish up by just saying I'm very excited that Pittsburgh has you, and I can't wait to see how this turns out.
I am really excited, and this is a great city to do these kinds of things, and it's a city that values its neighbors. It's a city that values the environment. It's a fantastic urban and natural experience. So the people of Pittsburgh are just wonderful, and they're as much a part of the secret sauce of this city as anything else.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you. So great to talk to you. Bye-bye.
That was Karina Ricks, the inaugural director of Pittsburgh's brand new Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. Karina believes that there is a nexus between mobility, real estate, and equity. How much one must spend on transport directly relates to how little they have left for real estate and housing. You can find out more about impact real estate investing and access the show notes for today's episode at my website, evepicker.com. While you're there, sign up for my newsletter to find out more about how to make money in real estate while building better cities. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and thank you, Karina, for sharing your thoughts. We'll talk again soon, but for now, this is Eve Picker signing off to go make some change.